Um,
No, that's
we'll see
okay.
where it is.
You know,
Yeah.
today's conversation is more just about, at least for the next 15 minutes, for us to, understand where we're coming from. Um,
Yep.
I would like to, kind of put off the discussion about how we're actually, if we're going to engage, how we're going to engage uh, under an estimate when I've actually got the estimate delivered to you.
Okay.
Okay, so this is our process miniature. This is something that we've done with clients when we're first going through, and they might be new to Agile, or we want to kind of refresh what's going on with how we work. What I'd like to do is just speed through this, ask you a couple questions, and then figure out, is this really the way we should be doing our estimate is under this process, or should we be planning for more upfront design? Would you feel more comfortable? And I think going through this will give us an idea of what, where you're most comfortable.
Okay.
So normally in this process, I also have a developer with me. I wasn't able to align one for this right away, somebody who can actually do demonstrations, and it takes a little bit longer to be able to do those things. We won't be doing that part of the demo, but we will go through and define and learn a little bit about, the communication and scope negotiation. So we see a user story as common English. It's got to be something that you as the stakeholder or the project manager, the product manager understand. The developer has to be able to understand it. The QA person has to be able to understand it, whether that's our side or your side. And it should be in the format of, as a user, I want to have this functionality so that I have this value. And those three things help us understand the scope of what something's going to do, the size and effort of the project, and the reason or the priority that this should take place, so that from iteration to iteration, we can determine, what's most important this time. And that's always a focus in Agile. We want to show you the working software, and then we want to hear back, for the next iteration. Now that you've seen where we're at, now that you understand what we've been capable of doing in this first 2 weeks, what do you think is still important? Is it the original list? Are there new things? Has something changed, in your own business process that suddenly, this week you need to retool towards something slightly different? You need a new function that's coming up. Any of those things can kind of change the backlog of what has to be worked on. The story point is really that measure of importance. It helps us triangulate and prioritize. A task is a specifical. That's a good word. It's the technical specific. It's the time when a developer looks at a user story and says, okay, I understand in general what you need, but how are we actually going to do that? Tasks usually come out during the iteration, the beginning of the iteration process. As a developer owns a user story, he will come back, with a 5-minute call to you or to whoever to say, okay, I just need a couple of questions answered here. Do you want it in blue or do you want it in red? Does it need to talk to this person as well? Do there need to be updates? Does this have to be versioned? There's always, extra little questions that pop up, and we're really big on that immediate communication. So we like to be able to either have an instant message channel open to you, works really well, email, or a telephone call, and we call those things model storming. We also try to keep them to an absolute minimum. My goal, usually in managing these projects, especially with larger teams, is to get your time as a stakeholder down to less than 3 hours in a given week, and when things really run smoothly, 2 hours in an entire iteration. So out of 2 weeks' time, you should only have to spend about 2 hours managing. Does that fit with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. The ideal time is what the estimators or the developers are trusted to give. Ideal time is perfect world scenario, no interruptions. We could get this task done in 4 hours. that gets modified by our actual velocity, so that as we're estimating for for new tasks that come on the backlog, or we're assigning tasks to a new iteration, we can look at our velocity. We can use that to determine how much ideal time of stories we can actually get done in a given iteration. And that's also a good checkpoint for you as the stakeholder in the project to say, wow, this is working, or this really isn't working, and we need to make some changes quick. And that's something that we want to be able to give you that kind of course correction every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm just kind of blow through this one by saying, you've been at this phase of iteration -1 here with the strategy for a long time. You've already gone through and actually done some releasing. And we have worked with Mitch in the past on iteration 0 to develop the discovery document that we did. As far as this project goes, I would estimate that we need to spend a couple of days coming up with modified domain models and ERDs and process flows and data flow diagrams, things like that, but not to the extent of what we did last time. I think it's more of because you've already written an excellent set of specifications and a great set of mock-ups. Those are things that we normally would go through that we just have to kind of adapt.
Sure.
The construction iterations is mainly what we would be focusing on until it gets time to release. We kind of talked about how the user story works. This is part of the demo that we would normally do. I'm going to blow past this. Just a deeper explanation of ideal time. If you imagine that in football there are 4 quarters of time and each one is supposed to be 15 minutes long, ideally it should be done in an hour, but really it's a lot longer than that, and there's always something that pops up. So what we ask for in that is trust from the stakeholder that the developer is going to give their honest ideal effort, and then an understanding from week to week that whatever that velocity is that we actually meet, that there is that's part of the plan, basically, that there's an understanding that it's ideal time is not the same thing as elapsed time.
No, I get that, and that football is a good analogy for that.
Okay, cool. We normally start off our first estimate or our first iteration at about 30%, but given that there's already a lot of the work done, there's really good specs, I would assume that we would be able to hit more of a 50% velocity in the first round, and we always shoot for at least 80% as we get into iterations 2 or 3. So what that means is, if you were to divide whatever ideal time we're going to assign by that percentage, that would tell you how much actual billable time we would give you. So if we said, we had a 40-hour week, I would probably, if we're at iteration 1, I would assign 20 ideal hours of time. If we were at iteration 3 or 4, I would assign 32 ideal hours of time.
I got it.
Okay. We want you to set the priority, and we want you to do it every 2 weeks. We need to make sure that everything aligns with the value. And the reason that I asked you about your experiences coming out of your iterations with this other team is that when you see the software, everything is supposed to be working according to what was agreed upon. And there needs to be a good test for that. It really helps to have a third person as an independent QA person to test it. We want to make sure that your involvement is such that you're always picking out what is the highest value in a given iteration. And again, you've aligned a lot of those things already into 4 different areas, so that helps.
Okay.
We like to get the tests written first before we do the development. That means that after we get all those user stories down, we decide what's fitting in a given iteration. Then we write out the actual tests in plain English to say, if I'm clicking the incrementer, I can click the incrementer until it maxes out. I can click the decrementer until it maxes out. I can clear the value in the text box. All of those tests for us, become the definition of whether or not a user story has passed.
Yep.
And it's one that we both agree on before the development starts, so there's no, misunderstanding. And I always like to ask the, question, what are you assuming as a stakeholder is there that's not actually showing in this list? Because if there's something that's not showing up in this list yet, and maybe it's aspect-oriented, maybe it's a general thing like, the look and feel has to meet a certain expectation, and those are good. But maybe it's more specific, like this also needs to be version controlled, or it needs to be linked in via. They have to be able to email somebody this data, or it needs to be considered for part of a report. All of those things are important in those tests.
Yeah, one thing, the way, the examples you give here are good, and another one I would add, and you guys probably do this, I'm assuming you guys have a very formal approach to development, and I really respect that. The one thing I would add, or I've seen used, is testing the positive and negative of every condition that may exist on a page. So, if you have a checkbox, you're testing both how it functions without it checked or with it checked, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that actually can play into automated testing too if we decide to get into that level of testing as well. Okay. So here's where we would normally go through and demonstrate, what kind of time it takes to actually build something. So if we consider that the iteration is over, you've got a working piece of software now. We go through, we check the acceptance test. Does everything pass? We look at what the actual velocity was. How many of the tasks that we said we would do actually passed? How many did we get done? And out of those that got done, how many actually passed? Because that number becomes our velocity for planning for the next round. And like I said, we should, in the first iteration, we should always be exceeding whatever our initial velocity is. That determines over time, the mean of that velocity. It determines where the total backlog ends. Because you can take the total ideal time of the backlog, divide it by the velocity per iteration, and that'll tell you exactly, how many iterations it would take to do everything on the backlog. And then you as a stakeholder can say, well, okay, that's too far out. Here's how we need to realign, given, what's done. And the reason I go to that example instead of, oh, good, everything's going to be done before time, is because things change all the time. There's always something else that comes into play. Kind of like the one piece that you guys had in that you were describing yesterday that you said, I'm trying to think of what it called. It's like a comparison quarterly
Yeah, the
function.
quarterly series.
Yeah. So there's things like that they hold a lot of value, but when you look at it in the big picture, you still have to make a decision about what goes in now versus later. That's all.
Exactly.
And that's what velocity gives us. It gives us a really accurate measurement of whether or not these things can fit here, because we're dealing with what actually happened with people's development time, and we're doing it in such a way, short measurements, that we can always make good course corrections.
Okay.
All right. So, and that's what evaluating the burn down is all about, is basically looking at, how much is left to do. Are these the things that we want to do this week or this iteration? As far as bugs go, anything that, is a bug gets added into the backlog and gets decided, is this something that's important to fix this iteration, this upcoming iteration, or, do we want to save it for the release iteration? Because it's, there's usually two different classifications there. It kind of depends on whether or not it's impeding functionality or it's just a slight quirk, that just needs to be addressed. And we go through and we, again, assign ideal times to any new user stories or the bugs. If there's a really large issue that we're dealing with, we talk around that. We usually spend a little bit of time investigating what the problem is and then talk about, is this big enough that it's going to take the project off course and we need to change direction, or, is there an alternative that we can throw in here? stakeholder, you're going to decide again what the priorities are. The acceptance tests are written again, and off we go to start all over again.
Okay.
So, and then we've kind of covered this part too. The end game is that when the construction iterations are finished, when we say that we're going into release iterations, and again, that's all part of the estimate, that's where new functionality stops. We need at least one release iteration that is strictly dedicated to tweaking things, hardening the code, really making it bulletproof in the way, exactly like you like it.
I understand that.
If it was really a large project, we might go 2 or 3 or 4 release iterations, if we're dealing with multiple applications under a suite or something like that.
Sure.
And typically, this is the hardest part for the team to come to agree to is, do we end the construction now? Do we try and buy an extra day into the release for one extra function? My experience with that is if there's enough work that it's of value to the company to add new features, then we should just do another construction iteration. If there's not, if the value just isn't there, then those features really need to get pushed off to a different release, because the release iteration has to be protected. We really cannot go into that time with new functionality. Adding new functionality at the last minute is a kind of a cubic change, not just,
No, I get that. I mean, we had the same thing when I was at PeopleSoft, that we defined things as, critical to general availability or not, and everything that you got to stabilize the code line, and so if you're adding things at the last minute or at the 11th hour, it does have, and it has created some instability in the system. When you put in some code in one area, it could have an adverse effect on another, depending on how integrated this thing is.
Yeah, it's a gamble. Sometimes it works out great, and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. So, then essentially at the end of the construction iterations, the feeling that I want to make sure that everybody has, the view of success that I want to make sure is there, is that maybe not every single thing that was on the list when we first started is in the application, but for whatever we don't have, there's definitely going to be other things that we chose to do that have as much or more value.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. A final note on documentation. I like to approach documentation at the end of the game because I think it's can be resource intensive to keep the older the documentation is, the more resources it can take to upkeep it. Now, we definitely keep notes on how things work in the development side of things, and of course there's always code commenting, but as far as what we produce as official documentation, it generally falls into 2 forms. One is the help files that an end user is going to have available, and the other is the technical docs for the support. And what we can do in this estimate is set aside a certain amount of time, for documentation once we're into the release phase. That would be my recommendation, and I'd like to know, what your thoughts are on what your expectations are on documentation.
No, the way you described it is fine. I mean, I like the idea of having some of the stuff in help text. Definitely, especially with the application being really self-service, if you will. I don't even know if people really use that term anymore, but we do not want to be involved really at all while people are signing up for the questionnaire and the scorecard, and even down to purchasing it. Right now we have an integration to authorize.net, and they could put this on their credit card, their corporate credit card, whatever. Or if they choose not to do that, then they can give us a call and we'll process the payment or deal with it that way. But for the most part, it's pretty hands-off, and they can drive this thing on their own. And so the instructional text or help text, all that stuff, I think would need to be in the application. It sounds like that was the way you guys approach it. And as far as technical documentation, it's nice to have. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with what we have in terms of if we know what the requirements are and we have those prototypes.
Great.
I don't need to see an actual technical specification. It
Great.
may be nice to see the actual schema, have a page or however many pages it is to know what the data schema is, but I don't expect that much more than that.
Okay. Do you have any preferences as far as the format? If we end up just whiteboarding a lot of that stuff and storing a photo of that whiteboard, does that suffice for some of those documentation needs? Would you prefer that they're converted into, Visio and things like that?
I mean, Visio would be ideal, but as long as the image is clear. I've taken pictures of whiteboards before, and I think it just depends on the quality of camera you're using. But
yep.
No, I definitely get the value. The process. I'm a whiteboard person myself, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so that's fine.
Great. That's everything I've got as far as our process goes. And I guess my final question is, is there anything in this that you're not comfortable with? Is there anything that I haven't addressed?
No. No, I mean, I can definitely work with this. I'd be comfortable with it. I'm looking at this particular slide. One thing maybe you can talk about and just see how it fits, where I did provide some of the requirements. Obviously I put them in that format so that they're referenceable and I can check through them to make sure that the tests have passed, and I can refer back to those requirements. If you guys typically do requirements, and I may be reading the slide incorrectly, but if it's done later, how do you do that? How is that stuff validated? Is it just against the storyboards that that you're doing?
We will. My recommendation for this particular project is to take your exact table structure and extend it out to the right by adding a column that becomes the user stories that align to that particular thing that has to happen. That's
fair. Okay.
We may then take those user stories and rearrange them in how we are going to develop, but I want to make sure that whatever it is that is in your head has a clear path to what to how the developer actually needs to get the job done.
It's not necessarily, and by the way, hi, this is Ryan.
Hi, hey Ryan.
I'd say it's not necessarily that requirements aren't captured early. It's that they're annotated rather than detailed. You know what I mean? So what you've got is in the green arrow or the green line there is that high level requirements and architecture, or at least most of it, and we did some of that in iteration 0 with Mitch a year ago as well. But then, what we're saying is less valuable is to take that and spend a couple of weeks putting it into a tome which outlines all of the, basically the coding interfaces and all that stuff, when there's a decent chance that when we get halfway through that green, to the right in the timeline, some things might change, and then, okay, we got to go back and make sure the documentation is up to date. Well, that's going to add another X amount of time to, the overall project. So that's it.
No, I get that. And I don't need the where it goes to the detailed design specs. I don't need that stuff. So that's fine. I mean, I understand and I appreciate the way you guys approach the your Agile framework.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you're comfortable with that, then I'm very comfortable in giving you our estimate under this approach. And I guess that's all I have for now. Ryan just had to take another call, and I was going to switch this over to him. How are you doing on your time? Are you still available to see the demo?
Yeah, I'm okay on time.
Okay.
I have something at 9:30, so I'm an hour away from that.
Okay.
And I know I still need to get you, and I will get it today. The the way we're forecasting the revenue for these different products.
Great. Time-wise, I'm already starting to just kind of do real rough estimates around the project and think about what our schedule of upcoming things are and what our commitments are. And I know that we've definitely got more resource availability from the design and interface perspective up front, and our back end is something that our tool actually makes happen rather quickly. A lot of it is generated through an ORM system. So would you be comfortable with, as far as the process goes, spending about the first 4 weeks creating all interface-based work that doesn't necessarily have the back end to it? And the reason I ask that is because I think our development availability at this point is not going to be, our resources aren't going to be available until probably the end of August for actual functionality.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I actually like that. I've always looked at it as you have to start with the presentation layer first, and then develop a back end to support that.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're gonna kind of put obstacles in the way for the user to be successful or to to fully adopt what you're trying to present to them. I've worked even at PeopleSoft. We had, unfortunately, I don't know if you're familiar with the applications there, but
my cousin used to work for PeopleSoft, but I don't really know their applications that well.
Yeah, they're basic enterprise apps, the whole financial systems, HR payroll systems, etc., CRM, and it started in HR and then it moved over into financial, etc. But what they did, it really started from the back end and didn't come from the front end, and so some of it was clunky to use. It did what it was supposed to do, and it did it really well because it was, architected and relational database and all. But from a user experience, you really had to kind of change your assumptions or to adopt their assumptions. And
well, we've got a big focus on usability here.
Good.
Bob is very, very well trained in usability studies. And also knows how to make it fit within, your business need as well, so that we're not, calling in study groups and things like that. He's got a really good eye for that kind of stuff. So, and, you've already gone through and done a lot of that work in how those things flow. I think really it's going to come down to, in a given release that we give you, or a given iteration build we give you, do we have a couple people that we could throw that in front of that have never used it before, and just walk them through it and see, see what their expectation would be. Where would they want to click next, type of thing.
Right.
So great. Well, Ryan just came back. If you're available, Ryan, I'm going to give you the comm here.
Yep.
And let's see. No, that's not how that works. There we go. And I'm going to actually duck out. So thanks for your time, Rick.
That's fine. Thank you, Erin.
All right. See my screen, Rick?
I do.
Okay, I won't take too much of your time here. I just wanted to demonstrate to you what it is that our technology is and can do for a development process. So I'm going to just explain it briefly, and then I'll go through a hello world. Basically, we always use the Northwind database, which most people are familiar with that database. So
yeah, that's been there for years.
Oh yeah. So what we have the framework as a whole is called WebWidgetry, and there's two pieces to that. There's the back end, which is called data services, and that's the tool that we use first. Once we have the database schema in place, or at least the initial schema, we load up Visual Studio. And by the way, these tools are all integrated tools into the Visual Studio environment. So, so we'll start a project that will use the data services tool to generate from the schema a whole, basically the whole data access layer. So that includes models and controllers for all of the tables we use in stored procedures, code that abstracts the access to getting, deleting, inserting, and updating records.
Okay.
And it also generates a web service layer that would be used to ultimately create a disconnected architecture. So we're fairly big on service-oriented architectures here. We believe that that's the best way to create scalable, systems. So if you have a web service that's deployed, you could have that on, one server farm, and then you could have your apps on another server farm. You could scale out or scale up as needed.
Got it.
So I'm just going to start with the back end here. So just go File, New Website. And since it's a web service, it's implemented as a website. And we're going to just say, so these are the two templates, project templates for Visual Studio. So we start with the Data Services project. So that just takes a little bit to load in all the files that it needs.
Okay.
And then from there, we go to the Tools menu, choose WebWidgetry Data Services. Oh, it's the docking. Visual Studio's docking sometimes is
That's
weird.
Right.
So how familiar are you with Visual Studio and this?
I'm not really familiar with it at all.
Okay.
No, I've not done any real formal web development.
Okay. Okay. I didn't know if you had a background in development prior to the business, side of things or not.
Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, I have a computer science degree. I used to do stuff in C++, and then at the time, Java was born, and everything was being ported over to the web, and so I was just a little bit before all the web stuff kicked off. And then I got out of all the development and went into management and business stuff.
Cool. So what I've done so far is there's this area up here that allows you to create as many database connections as you want for your project. So you can connect to multiple databases in one project. For each connection, we rename it, then come down here and set the connection properties. So I'm pointing to the database server, and then I can choose which database I want to use on that server. Once I've set up the connection, then I can create as many providers. These providers essentially are code generation providers. So you choose the connection string, which tells the provider where to get the schema from.
Mm-hmm.
You choose things like namespace that the code should live in, so Nth P for Nth Penguin, .Northwind namespace. And then there's a lot of other settings here that usually we just leave as is, but it allows you to control the code generation process. Things like, okay, maybe you don't want to generate code for these tables or these views or these procedures. So you can exclude or explicitly include those items. And then there's a lot of other extra stuff, but for the sake of brevity, I will just skip that. And then once you've got that all set up, all you do is click Generate. It asks you to save, and then this little thing comes up. It takes about a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So what it's doing now is going and getting the schema from the database, generating all the code for the data access layer. So this is typically a step. If you don't have a tool like this, this is a very time-consuming, tedious step that really has nothing to do with the actual value of the application. It's just required plumbing code.
Right.
And we've automated that whole process. So now over in my solution, you can see that we've got more folders. I've got a bunch of code here.
Now, is that, I'm sorry to interrupt, Ryan, is this something that you guys have added as a plugin to Visual Studio? Or?
Yeah, these are all our home-built tools that are part of our overall framework.
Okay.
So this tool here on the left is something we made. We integrated it with Visual Studio.
Got it.
So it's something you would have, if you already have Visual Studio, you would just have to install our stuff, and then you'd have it.
Okay.
So just to give you a look at the code here, it's divided logically in models and controllers. And so to pick a table, category table, and the generated code is collapsed in regions and whatnot, but just you can get a feel for how much code is generated by looking at the line numbers for this one file, 945 lines. So this can kind of map in your mind to equate to a very large amount of time that it would take to hand code something like this. And the value of the generated code is it's completely abstracted from the underlying database, and when we make changes at the schema level, all I have to do is click Generate again, and those changes propagate up through the data access layer. And we've also got a generator for JavaScript objects here that get loaded into the front end side of our framework, which I'll show you in a minute. That these are metadata objects that get loaded into the application to auto-generate things like forms, searchable grids, things like that. So there's a lot of work on the front end that's automated as well. But so I've generated it. My back end is done. I can just get it running. I just have to pick a port number here so that I can connect to it from the front end.
Okay.
And say OK. So now this is the web service that was also generated, and this exposes the operations to the database at at an endpoint level, so that we've got all these abstracted methods for creating records for the given table. So I can create a customer by accessing that method. I can delete items.
Got it.
There's get list, and a whole query API that enables some pretty advanced searching.
Okay.
So that's running. Now I'm going to go to create another project which represents the front end. And the beauty of this back end is that one back end could serve multiple applications.
Cool.
So create a new website. This time WebWidgetry.interface. So that takes a little bit longer to set up in Visual Studio. There's more files that it's copying over to the project space.
Okay.
Just give it a minute here. All right. Okay, so just set that. Once that project is created, again, go to Tools, choose WebWidgetry Interface this time. It's another dockable plugin. This time, instead of creating connections to a database, we're creating connections to a web service, which would be the service that we just created. Northwind, and we've got to grab the path that the service is running on. Plug that in there. What's my namespace? and then we want to copy all the JavaScript items.
Okay.
And I just click bind. That actually goes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna kind of ask if that basically ties the UI to the back end.
Yeah. Yep. That's it. So then once it's bound, then we could actually drill in and we could see the methods that are exposed at the web service level. So those all those things that we just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And then the objects that are represented by the models. So these are the views and the tables. And for each one of these objects in here, if we so wanted to, we could come in and say, let's say we're working on some code. I'll just get rid of all this here. You know, I need to, I need a list of categories. And since our framework is very much Web 2.0, it's a lot of JavaScript. So we've got helpers to generate the required code to create these different things from these objects. So I'll create a grid. So that just spits out all the code that our framework would expect to create a grid of categories.
That's nice.
So there's that mode of operation where those little things can help save time here and there. But then there's actually the ability to create the entire application. Now, the caveat here is that this generated application would serve mainly as a prototype, and then we go in and add custom logic to it. But basically, we just come up here, and once we've got the service bound, we can now choose the tables to represent our top-level tabs of the application. So I'm going to just choose a few tables here. That's probably good enough. Then I can right-click and choose Generate Application. And now there's a new folder over here. Mm-hmm. And there's a web page, and then there's a bunch of widgets. And I can just type that and hit play. Did you have a question there?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So it's just building, and it'll come up in a minute. Okay, so now the layout of this application is kind of a standard template, and it's a fairly common layout where we've got top-level tabs that represent the the areas, and then kind of a master detail view kind of a layout here. Mm-hmm. So the categories tab was open by default, and what you see here is a grid, and this is a grid that was, it basically for every column in the table, it's going to create a column in this grid, and that's not always necessarily very useful to show all of the columns.
Sure.
So you could come in here, you could turn them off at the UI layer if you wanted to.
You can even expand probably the width of the grid and
yeah, you can do
all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And these grids, again, these things are auto-generated, so if I go and change the schema database, click regenerate, and the next time I load this application, if I had changed this from description to notes, that would be automatically changed in the UI as well.
Okay.
So the thing about these grids is that they're automatically searchable, so I could search for beverages, and that that search functionality, that's typically a lot of time to code, so that's all automated. They're automatically paginated, so I don't know if you noticed, but there's a little pager bar down here. I don't have enough records for it to actually page, but
yep.
And sortable as well, so I could sort
by column.
There's a little bug there. Yeah, sort by column. could delete items. And another little issue there. I think I might have an altered Northwind schema where things aren't quite jiving.
That's okay, so Ryan. I mean, I get the point. I definitely see that you guys can quickly model this stuff. Now, this is a page. If you were to add, you click. I didn't really follow you there, but yeah, you click add, and so you get this pop-up. So that's pretty good.
Yep. So you could add.
And that's all auto-generated as part of the thing as well, right?
Yep. So if you added a new column to the table, that would automatically be in the form, and it does type detection so that string-based fields are text. If the string field is greater than 256 characters, there's a bigger text area.
Got it.
Binary fields have a file picker, so you can upload files.
Okay.
Boolean is checkbox. It's all automatic.
Right.
And then you could double-click here to
edit.
Actually edit.
Yeah.
So.
That's good.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, in about 10 minutes, I have a working prototype of an application that could very well serve as basically, I would say a more robust, featured version of what you guys showed me yesterday for your admin side of things. And from there, you go in and customize and add logic. Day one, you're at the important part, which is making your application unique based on your business needs.
Okay.
Rather than spending 2, 3, 4 weeks writing all that plumbing, blah, 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 blah.
Right. So this is probably that, when you guys look at this is that first construction iteration where you just have, the vanilla pages and everything constructed through the widgetry stuff, and then you start putting the unique flavor to it through the subsequent iterations.
Well, yeah, and that's if the app that we need to build, fits into this auto-generated app layout here, because this is the only one right now that we're generating.
Yeah.
So this could work for your administration area, but it might not work to generate like the front-end website.
Gotcha.
So we're pragmatic. We're not going to say this is a one-size-fits-all, but I just wanted to show you the capabilities of the framework. I mean, even if I don't do this auto-generated application, I'm already, in day one, I'm already at the point at which, I can piece together my UI, and I've got streamlined access to the data. I don't have to spend any time whatsoever writing data access code.
Got it.
So there's different levels of value, and this value is cool, and we're proud of it, and it gets administrative apps up and running very quickly, but it's not the end all.
No, I get that.
There's a lot. So, yeah.
That's good. All right, cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a little flavor of what the framework's all about, so you have a better understanding when we talk about it. What we're actually talking about.
All right.
And then we will be in touch hopefully soon. Me and Erin will work on the estimate. Erin, what's your in your mind your ETA to get them something? End of day tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, we'll try to get something back to you tomorrow.
And like I said, I'll get you the updated forecast. I don't even know if you have an original, and if you did from some stuff that Mitch was doing last year, I'm sure it's quite different. But I'll get you guys something today.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, Ryan, thank you. Erin, if you're there, if you can hear me, thank you very much.
I'll tell him you said that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rick. Yep.
Bye-bye.